45 years. Today is the day. We're going to start. I'd like you all to stand up with me, please stand. And while you're standing, look under your seat. Feel right under the front. You feel a death certificate. Now, there are some people with papers, but they'll be right to the front. If you find something taped there, it's a big...
I don't feel anything.
Right here. If you find this, please come up to the front. Right now, and you want a prize? A fantastic stainless steel water bottle. And everyone else stand up. We're going to get started. We're going to get the energy out before we bring the Disney Legends up.
I've already been dating this. Almost downstairs.
Let's see if this is going to work.
It's not. I can't see now.
Oh, it did work. Thank you, everybody. Let's see, one more time. Okay, you're gonna have to do the slides manually, please. If we can whip through the first few slides, because I want you all to repeat after me. No offense to the Pledge of Allegiance, our great nation, but we're gonna do our own pledge here. I think you know what it is. You may not even need it on the stage, but if you will recite along with me, when hinges creak in doorless chambers, and strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls. Whenever candlelights flicker, though the air is deathly still, that is the time when ghosts are present, practicing their terror with ghoulish delight. Welcome, foolish mortals, to
Haunted Mansion.
45 years, when hinges creak, 45 years behind me. Bottle girl, please hand out the bottles, please. Right, step right over there to the side and grab your bottle. Thank you very much for. Oh, wow, 1, 2, 3, everyone got one. Awesome. Well, I'm just going to start by introducing our special guests for this panel discussion today. The first guest that I'm going to introduce, neither of them really need an introduction to any of you, but he's responsible for almost anything with wheels at Disneyland. Almost anything that moves. This man had something to do with, but specifically today, he is the father of the Doom Buggy. He invented the Omnimover system, which conveys you through the Haunted Mansion. Please welcome with me White Imagineer Disney legend, Bob Gurk. Of course, you know, the Haunted Mansion had so many different artists and Imagineers involved with its creation and development. One of the key players was Marc Davis, one of Walt Disney's 9 old men. Started as an animator to create some of the most iconic characters that Maleficent, Tinkerbell, Sleeping Beauty. And then he went to work for Walt Disney to work in Imagineering and create some of the most amazing attractions and characters that we know. Well, his wife Alice also was an Imagineer. She worked in costuming and worked on a lot of things along with the Imagineers. And we are privileged to have with us today Marc Davis' wife of the late Marc Davis, Disney legend Alice Davis. You got a microphone, yeah.
There's one good thing about getting old. You can get more men.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gotta be that kind of show.
You know, I was trying to think of some things. Oh, thank you very much for coming. I was trying to think of some things to share with Halloween and Haunted Mansion super fans. You know, because the Haunted Mansion's history is pretty well known and it's pretty well told. But I think I have some things here that are going to be of some interest to you all. So, okay. So we're going to start with a picture here of the Stour Castle in Kansas City. Now, probably most of you have never heard of this in relation to the Haunted Mansion. And I'm gonna admit this very first little bit here, I'm gonna talk about a little conjecture, but that's what I like to do, so we're gonna do some conjecting. And, this mansion was rumored to be haunted in Kansas City at the time, by the time Walt was just starting out with LI Works, starting to get his professional role as trying to get working in films and things in Kansas City. And you'll see, let me see if my laser is pointing here. You'll notice this little, this is a castle that was in Kansas City. Now, for reasons I won't get into, I believe that Walt was well aware of this building. He had a friend who was a relative of someone that was associated with the Stour family. And if we move forward to this, now you might recognize this picture. This is a picture that Harper Goff drew for Walt Disney when Walt was thinking of just, maybe I could have a haunted house, and this I think dates back to 1951, well before Disneyland ever was thought of. I think Harper may have been thinking in terms of, Walt may have been thinking of putting a little park by the studio in Burbank at this time, and but you'll notice it has some very similar features to the Stour Castle. Now, I think that is a total coincidence, but what I'm going to point out to you here is that there's a lot of total coincidences in the development of the Haunted Mansion, some of which were fruitful and some of which were not. But that's just, all of this is to say, every theme park Walt Disney had a hand in developing, which would be Disneyland, of course, his Mickey Mouse Park, the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, and also Riverside, is that what it was called? The park in, they were thinking of building in Ohio. Do you remember, is that called Riverside Park? I think Riverside. That park also, all those parks, he planned on having a haunted house in there. And in fact, the Riverside Park, it was going to be the main thing when you walked into the gates. And you wouldn't see a big castle at the end of the road, you'd see there was a haunted house. So it was clear that Walt Disney, from the very beginning, had in his mind Americana and small town America involves the haunted house on the hill on the side of the road, as you can see in Harper Goff's picture here. So I'm going to try to quickly get through some things. This, we're going to skip forward to about, well, no, this is 1950. This book came out right here, Decorative Art of Victoria's Era by Francis Lipton. Now, right around 1951, of course, is when Harper Goff drew that picture. In the mid-50s is when Ken Anderson started drawing pictures of haunted houses. So this was a new book in the Disney library at that time. And inside this book, there is this photograph. And this book was published in 1950. So at his house, this picture was taken, I believe, in 1937. So that looks familiar. So you hear stories about the development of the architecture of the Haunted Mansion. The truth is there was not a lot of change once Ken Anderson found this house and then drew this one. So you can see he did not even really change the perspective. And then of course Sam McKinn finished it off so they could show Walt Disney, and this is the famous drawing we have the Haunted Mansion today. So Alice, I know that when they were talking about the Haunted Mansion, Mark specifically with Walt, he had asked him, about should it be scary, should it be funny. Can you talk a little bit about Mark and Walt's conversation about the Haunted Mansion being funny versus scary?
Yes.
Use your microphone.
I'll never get used to this. No, the thing that Mark wanted to ask Walt about was that he wanted the haunted house And he said, I want you to do something funny in it. But he said, what I want most of all is I want the outside of it pristine clean. And I want the lawn mowed. And I want the flowers looking very nice. And I don't want anything to have to do with being haunted or anything else. It's just going to be the haunted house. But he said, I want it clean. He said, I want all the parents to see that my park is clean. And they're not going to get dirty or poisoned. They're going to have a place where they can come and have a wonderful time, and the whole family can enjoy it together. And he said, then when you go in the house, you could do anything you want, make it as haunted as you want, and so on. And Mark said, well, do you want something like the Adam family? And he said, no. He said, I want it to be what we would have it. And he said, we have a lot of people working on this, and we'll come into what will be a good haunted house, but it has to be pristine clean, because I want them to know I have a clean park.
Yeah. That's right. So that's why this painting, when actually, I've heard Sam Lincoln talk about, when this painting was shown to Walt Disney, Walt said, that's not what we're looking for. Of course, the architecture obviously was what they were looking for, but all the bats and the spooky moss, that's what Alice is saying. None of that. We're going to keep it nice and clean. So, stepping back in time a little bit to the 50s again, a lot of the Imagineers worked on the Haunted Mansion. It wasn't, you hear a lot about Mark Davis, who we're going to talk about quite a bit in a little bit, Claude Coates, but there were a lot of, originally, before they got too far into the development, a lot of the artists that were working for Walt came up with ideas. Now this is by Bruce Bushman, who did a lot of Fantasyland work, but you can see he had an idea for some giant portraits that were menacing, which is something that actually made its way all the way into the actual mansion. So for a moment, I'll talk about Ken Anderson. Ken Anderson, of course, was the person that Walt first said, okay, I want you to make the Haunted Mansion. He wanted him to kind of run the program at first. So in the late 50s, I think around 1957, he drew that picture of the haunted house, and then he started putting together little mock-ups. And I think Ken Anderson even had a room in the studio where he would mock up big life-size versions of his effects, and so we're going to have to not talk a lot about that part of the Haunted Mansion's development today, but it should suffice to say that Ken Anderson, and here's a sketch that Ken Anderson did, so you can see he had the idea of, kind of a haunted-looking house, spider webs, cracked plaster, there's a ghost at the end of the hall, kind of a traditional haunted house, and somehow it never really worked out. He had some very intricate plans for the Haunted Mansion, actually, and that wasn't precisely, I suppose, what Walt was looking for. Ken Anderson went on back to animation, and then later on, Yale Gracie and Wally Crump came into the picture and started working on Haunted Mansion. So here's some construction photos of Haunted Mansion, just building it in Anaheim. And there's the Haunted Mansion when it first opened. You can see the beautiful bronze plaques that probably were that way for less than a year before they turned to the beautiful, patina that we have today. So, and then this is Walt Disney World. This is just to show you an example of kind of the scale of the ride you're in. You can see that's the space it takes. And of course, this isn't the whole building, but that small facade, and that's even bigger. That facade right there is probably about the size of Disneyland's. They kept, no, maybe that is the whole thing. But at any rate, it's obvious, you'd be surprised how many people still think you walk into that house and everything happens and you come back out. I get that a lot. People think that's what's involved. So, but that's a little bit about the history. There's Yale Gracie working on some special effects. He and Rolly Crump sequestered themselves and just came up with all kinds of crazy things. And then I'll mention also Harriet Burns, who was in the model shop. Here's a model she built of one of Mark's characters, the Hatbox Ghost. He's kind of famous. This is a mock-up of the attic and him in his place. And then, of course, right here is the Hatbox Ghost. This is the only photo, by the way, of the Hatbox Ghost in the Haunted Mansion that I know of. There's a little video also out there that someone caught of kind of going by him in the mansion, but that's on the picture. Okay, oops, let's go back. Okay, so another Harriet's mock-ups. There's a conveyance there in the middle and some people sitting there. So, you know, pretty quickly after Ken Anderson left his role at the Haunted Mansion, the designers realized we're going to need to take people through this on some kind of conveyance. Walking through, because Walt did a lot of, he visited he or some of his Imagineers visited quite a few walking tours like Hearst Castle, Winchester Mystery House, trying to figure out, you know, how does this work and how many people can we take on a tour of a big building. And they finally decided, you know, it's going to have a conveyance. And fortunately, we have on stage someone here who knows a little something about conveyance at Disney parks. So, Bob, I was wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about, maybe back before the Haunted Mansion. I know the Haunted Mansion we'll talk about in a moment, but when you really started thinking of conveyances for the Disney parks, when did that all really begin? How did that come up from Walt and the parks deciding we're going to...
I got one of my own.
deciding we're going to need to take
You gotta watch out, between the two of us, it's 170 years. Well, all right, well, thank you, Jeff. You know, I thought this was gonna be a simple panel. No, it's a trade show. I walked around, I saw animated intestines falling out of the and I noticed everybody dresses in black. However, you will note my shoes are blood red. And I learned just before I came in, this really, truly is a cult. I saw you all stand up, salute, and stared at the words. And what am I in here for? What am I? Well, I'll talk about the mansion. As some of you know, at Great Enterprises in those days, we had a lot of people working on a lot of different things. None of these projects ever started and stopped. They were a kind of a blend of activities over a long period of time, with Walt just kind of sifting a bunch of ideas through a bunch of people. And obviously, by 1951, Walt wanted a Haunted Mansion. And then, of course, the closer we get, there's more gags to do with the show. Yale Gracie was really the leader of that pack, along with Rolly Crump. And Walt just gave Yale this room and said, well, just go in there and play, do something, anything you want. No deadlines, no nothing. So every once in a while you'd walk by the hallway by Yale's office, and then he'd open the door like a creaky door and he says, come in. And he's got a gag, he wants to show you a gag. Because, you know, we mock up a gag, and then, of course, we convert it into a real show action equipment. But he would do stuff, and some of you who know all the history of Yale Gracie, some of these gags would scare the daylights out of the janitors and make them go back in. But over time, we did a lot of mock-ups at the studio on a sound stage. So at some point in time, around 1962, over at 800 Sonora, where all of us were finally moved out of the studio into one building, we had a large drafting room, and there was a number of drafting, like mechanical people, architectural people, graphics people. And it was led by a guy by the name of Harvey Gillette, who was a real dyed-in-the-wool classic architect type of designer. And somehow in 1962, even before this Haunted Mansion project was underway, he talked Walt into the fact that, well, let's just go ahead and design it, because he wanted to design it. He took Anderson's sketches, and he laid out that building, and he personally drew almost all the drawings for that structure. And something I never understood, somehow there was approval to go ahead and build that building long before the show was figured out, and years before it was ever going to be a mechanical attraction. So that's a curious point of timing, that normally we would say, okay, we're going to do a whole project, and then we would do it down at the park. This house suddenly just showed up because Harvey wanted it. Simple as that. And as you can appreciate from the previous picture he showed you, people think, well, how are you going to get all that stuff on the house? Well, if if you look at aerial photos of Disneyland, you'll see that the attraction is way out behind a railroad, and there's this big steel bridge that was built in order to have the train go over the top of the walkway, where after you go down through the elevator, you go out in the back. All that had been figured out before we knew what the heck we're going to do. And then, backing up to early 1966, we had a new attraction called the Voyage Through Inner Space. And how many of you knew what was going on in that dark ride? Yeah, it wasn't called a dark ride for nothing, yeah? Did you get my drift there, yeah? Anyway, coming out of the New York World's Fair 64, 65, I had looked at a lot of the different conveyances that we had at the fair, and several of them kind of intrigued me. One of them was the AT&T thing, where it was a chain of vehicles. So just sitting there in John Hinch's office one day, you guys all know this, I'm sitting there and I pick up his candied apple, and I'm talking about, if we could have a show where we could direct the audience into the different scenes, so we would segue through a story, and we could just put people, we just kind of twirl them, and I twirl the apple, and I said, yeah, now we could put it on a track, goes up and down, turns right and left, and we just turn the car relative to the chassis. A conversation just as quick as that. And I said, yeah, you could turn in all directions, and since I was an airplane pilot at that time, one of the navigational aids is called an Omni, meaning all around. So we're going to move, Omni Mover. So just in a quick conversation, that name started as just a place setting, got stuck with it. This whole darn thing's all called Omni Mover now. But then they said, well, let's get going on a thing for Monsanto. We'll use it there. And then I figured out a gag where you have a rotating turntable, and for certain technical reasons that have some advantages. So the car actually was designed for the Monsanto attraction, but as I was developing that, we had a little test track at the back of the warehouse at 1401 Flower in Glendale, and the Haunted Mansion people came over and looked at this thing and says, oh my gosh, we could make it a ride-through. It solves all the problems. Walt said it's not going to work as a walk-through. So a lot of history, people think, oh, the Omnimover came first and was in the Haunted Mansion. Haunted Mansion picked up an idea in the middle of the development of a test for Monsanto. That's how this history gets all goofed up here.
Okay.
That was it?
That's great.
Okay.
As you can see, and the Omnimover.
I have to take it. You get dried out here.
Yeah, please do. I do too. And as
Do
you
you
can
think that's water? One of your exhibitors here, he loaned me this, and he says it's Zombie Princess. Oh, what is this?
got me.
That's what it says, Zombie
It does
Princess.
say Zombie Princess.
Ooh, so you kind of martini.
Now,
Now, you can go ahead now.
So you can see the omnivores here are, it's more than just a little carriage that you sit in, it's actually the bulk of it is what is underneath. And so when you're in the Haunted Mansion, you're actually raised up on a false floor through the whole thing so that the omnivore has room to function.
Where did you get that picture?
I can't exactly tell you where I got that.
That is a big rat's nest of stuff. What's going on? Look, that looks like a repair job.
It probably is. I'm assuming that's why they're...
Yeah, because on the left of the picture, that bright colored thing,
Yeah,
that's actually a surfboard.
that is?
Yeah, when you have a cover the track between the vehicles, it looks like a surfboard, so it's officially known as the
Oh, that's what
surfboard.
you call it, surfboard.
So you didn't know that,
I didn't
did
know
you?
that. And now we're getting super nerdy. Okay. Well, thank you, Bob. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Mark Davis. Now you might recognize this painting here. This is one of many concept sketches and paintings that Mark Davis did for the Haunted Mansion. Many of them made their way into the Haunted Mansion, and many of them didn't. Now, I'm kind of excited that we're able to share with you today some of Mark's artwork that either didn't quite make it into the mansion, or things that you just might not have seen very often. Maybe it made it into the mansion, but you haven't really seen it very much. So without further ado, I'm going to take you on a little trip here. Now, one thing you'll notice, this obviously is going to be a changing portrait. You see that Mark had kind of a wicked sense of humor, right? And one of the reasons I believe that Walt brought Mark to the park was because he felt like Disneyland needed a little bit more of a sense of humor. So Alice, I was wondering, maybe you can talk a little bit about Mark's sense of humor. Where did he get that wicked sense of humor?
I think he got his humor from the traveling that he did. He went to almost 20 grammar schools before he graduated from the 6th grade. His father was chasing the rainbow, and always the grass was going to be greener on the other side, but it wasn't, so he kept going. So the shortest time Mark was in a school, he was there for 27 days, and he went to the next one. His humor was from living all over the United States, from state to state and back again and so on. But the home place was in Northern California. Mark was born during the gold rush, oil rush in Bakersfield. And he was born there, but left at 6 months. He found out it was not too great a place to be. So anyway, but his sense of humor was living in all these different places and finding out how the humor was different from each place he went to. Plus the reason he started drawing was because when he would go from school to school, the young boys would get this young kid out onto the playfield when it was recess and just beat the daylights out of him. So he decided he'd start drawing pictures. And so he'd draw pictures of all different kinds of things, and they wouldn't beat him up if he'd give them a painting or a picture. So that's what started him doing it, and that also helped his humor and also helped his body. So,
But yeah, I think one of the things about Mark's humor that is so interesting is that in Disneyland, it's a whole family park, right? You have kids and adults and grandparents, and somehow Mark knew how to reach, with one joke, a little kid or their grandparents. His humor could reach almost anyone with one single joke, which I think is amazing.
that was why Walt removed him from animation and took him to Disneyland, because he said, it's not funny anymore. He was having Mark at different times do something funny, like the family that was going up a pole with a rhino. That was the first joke Mark put in the park. And so after that, Walt would always come and say, we need something funny over here. And so he was doing this, and he was doing so well at it, Walt took him out of animation and putting in the shows and rides and jokes at the park.
Yeah, some interesting things I think here. You see here, I believe this could be Pirates or it could be the Haunted Mansion. It kind of goes with both of the, you see the same gag in the Haunted Mansion, sort of, in one of the stretching portraits. So, and of course Mark worked on both of those. And here's a series of changing portraits for the ghost ship. And one thing I think is interesting is I do believe Mark, when he's kind of got heavily involved with the Haunted Mansion development. I think he went back and looked at what had been done, and some of his concepts, I think, build on things early on in the Haunted Mansion's development. They were talking about sea captains and that type of a thing. So, he does have a number of works that are based on that type of thing, the ocean and pirates. But another thing that, like this, for instance, is a Greek, perhaps a Greek goddess or a Greek girl who changes into an olive tree. Now that's really interesting. One thing I want to note about this painting actually you can see right now in person at the Walt Disney Family Museum. If I can stop to give a little plug, at the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco at the Presidio, there's a Mark Davis exhibit of artwork right now. Here's a it's actually quite amazing how much artwork they packed into that little exhibit, and there's a whole wall of original Haunted Mansion concept artwork in there. So, for us nerds, might be worth the trip up to San Francisco. But and this is one of the paintings you can see. All that to say, there were, I don't want to know if I want to say hundreds, possibly hundreds of concepts that Mark did that were not used, at least dozens. Here's Henry and Anne Boleyn. He's there, and then she shows up a little angry at what went on there. Another one of his ideas. And so this is a little bit closer to some of the changing portraits we ended up with. This is a witch of Walpurgis.